Welcome, dear listener, to Wishcrafting. My name is Wishamaya, and today we are diving in to episode 2 of the King Arthur series. Today we're going to be discussing the Welsh Underworld, Annwn, and the role that it plays in King Arthur's legend. Let's go ahead and jump right in, because I'm very excited to talk to you about the Welsh Otherworld, Annwn. Listener, if you remove Annwn from the Arthurian legend, then Arthur stops being myth, and he becomes just a king. You see, in Wales, there is a word for the world beyond the world, the realm that overlaps ours, the place of beauty, danger, abundance, and strangeness. And that word, that world, is Annwn, spelled Annwn, and pronounced Annwn. And it's not heaven, it's not hell, and it's definitely not the mortal afterlife. It's the Otherworld, a parallel kingdom that touches ours along the edges. In Welsh mythology, Annwn is described as a land without illness or decay, a place of endless feasting, music, and youth. In the stories, sometimes Annwn lies beneath hills, and sometimes it lies beyond water, particularly the Western Sea. But sometimes it's just across any old surface of any old lake, just like in Arthur's tale. And the most important thing that I could tell you about Annwn in Welsh mythology and their understanding of it is that Annwn is not and is never far away. It's near to us. It is near to our world, but it is also structured. It has its own ways, laws, and rulers. And to understand how Annwn works and why it matters for King Arthur and his tale, we're going to need a foundational story. Now, this story might echo stories from other cultures. Give it a listen and see what motifs and themes you pick up on in the story of the two kings and the year between worlds. This story begins long before Arthur ever sailed to the Otherworld, which he does a couple of times. When a Welsh prince named Pwyll made a mistake in the forest. And it wasn't just any mistake. You see, he was hunting when he saw a stag driven down by a very strange pack of dogs. They were white as bone, with red ears and long legs. In Celtic lore in general, that little detail is not decorative. Instead, they're a signal. White hounds, red ears, are a clear sign of Fae. Pwyll, failing to recognize this sign, drove the strange hounds away and set his own dogs upon the kill, stealing their hunt. And not soon after, their master arrived. And this was no mere hunter. This was Annwn, king of Annwn, king of the Otherworld. But luckily for Pwyll, he didn't immediately strike him down. He didn't curse him, he didn't turn him into a frog, but instead, he offered him a strange deal. a trade, if you will. He offered that for a year and a day, the two kings, because Pul ruled a big city in the nearby human mortal realm, and Arwen rules Annwn, so he offered that the two kings exchange places. Arwen would rule Pul's kingdom and vice versa. And, of course, Pul agreed. And so the mortal king, for 1 year and a day, became king of the Otherworld. And what he found there was not chaos. It wasn't a hellish, fiery, tormenting place like other mythologies and religions might believe the Otherworld to be. But instead, Pul found that the world of Annwn was ordered and beautiful and noble, and that the court of the king was refined, with a gracious queen and a loyal people. While Pul was king of the Otherworld, time flowed normally. A year in Annwn was a year in Wales, which is not always the case when we talk about Annwn, but in this story it was. Something we might circle around to much later in the series. Anyways, Pul ruled wisely while he was the king. He kept his honor, and when the year ended, the kings returned to their proper realms, each having prospered in the other world. You see, the king, the real king of Annwn, got something pretty sweet out of this deal. He had a mortal enemy that was encroaching upon his lands and trying to consistently go to war with him. But this darker, more evil king in the Otherworld had a spell placed on him that if he were to be hit twice, he would regenerate. But if he were killed in a single blow by Annwn, the king of Annwn, he would die. And Annwn knew that he couldn't take this guy down in a single blow. But Pul didn't know that. So, with Pul being magically him, and the rules of the spell being a little wonky, long story short, he manages to take the king's foe down for him. And of course, the king is incredibly grateful. While Pul was in the Otherworld, in Annwn, he didn't sleep with his wife, who is very beautiful, and he could have because she had no idea. But he didn't do that. He didn't change anything up. He didn't rattle the boat. He just did what he needed to do. Because he knew that he got there because he initially fucked up. So he didn't want to fuck up again. And I honestly really love that about him. We love growth. Let's celebrate Pul's growth. Ready? We're going to snap. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yes, go Pul. He learned. We love it when men learn. So Pul gained some growth, he got some knowledge, he got to experience the magic of Annwn, which wows him completely over and over again in the story, and he gets to experience the never-ending feasts and dancing and blah, blah, blah. He had a really good time for a year and a day, and he's like, this is not that bad of a deal. Then he defeats the foe that he had no worries about defeating in the first place, and he goes back to being himself, and goes back to the human world with all of this knowledge and adventure under his belt, along with some personal character development. And after this story ends, Pul becomes known as Pul Pun Annwn, or Pul, head of Annwn, creating a title that a human can carry as a emissary between this world and the other world. So what exactly does that teach us? and how does it relate to Arthur? Well, first of all, it sets the scene that Annwn isn't a completely strange, hellish, evil otherworld. It's not just a fantasy either. It's very much like ours in the story of the two kings. And it's incredibly structured in the story, and Poole is surprised to find just how structured it is, just with a really heaping big dose of magical etherealness to it. And we also learn that while Annwn is very much like our world, mortal rulers can cross its threshold if they're willing to risk it. This is the important part, because this is the world that Arthur inherits. You see, there is an early Welsh poem about Arthur called The Spoils of Annwn. And in it, Arthur does something that no ordinary king would even dare to do. He sails to the Otherworld. And it's not to conquer, and it's not to seize territory, but it is to retrieve something very precious, to seek treasure, specifically a cauldron. The poem describes a series of otherworldly fortresses that Arthur sails past, revolving castles, glass citadels, halls of revelry, each stronger and stranger than the last. But it's in the very last one of them that the prize they are seeking lies. And it's called the Cauldron of Annwn. In the poem, it is richly described. I mean, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous cauldron. And not only is this cauldron beautiful and an exquisite piece of craftsmanship, but it is also warmed not by flames, but the breath of 9 maidens. Did you expect that? Because I didn't expect that when I learned this. The breath of 9 maidens? That is so odd, but so whimsical, right? But there's even more to this beautiful, whimsical cauldron. This cauldron has a sense of sentience because it will not boil the food of a coward. Let that settle in for just a second. This cauldron has the sentience to choose not to boil the food or broth or whatever is in the pot for what it deems as a coward. This ability isn't super surprising because in Celtic myth, cauldrons are rarely ordinary objects if they appear in the story. Instead, they're symbols of renewal, of sovereignty, and of rebirth. There are cauldrons that restore life, cauldrons that grant wisdom, and cauldrons that can feed armies without ever emptying. To possess such a vessel is to possess sovereignty and legitimacy and magic and all that comes with the capabilities to possess such an item. So, we know from the first episode that Arthur was very quickly set up to be larger than life. So, of course, Arthur sets his sails towards Annwn and returns with this legendary cauldron. But while Arthur is legendary, his men are not. And this adventure comes at a great cost, because 3 shiploads of men went with him, but only 7 singular men returned. The poem never explains exactly how they are lost. Did they die? Did they stay on a magical isle that they found? We don't really know. What we do know, however, is that they were, one way or another, ensnared by Annwn. And this loss is significant. It makes something really clear to the reader. And that is that Arthur's greatness is unparalleled. This is yet another story singing his praises, singing of his heroic and legendary status, while also building up a really solid picture of who can and can't go where, and what kind of magic can and can't be brought from the otherworld to the mortal realms. And it establishes that magic has boundaries, right? The cauldron has boundaries. That is an integral part to understanding specifically Welsh folklore and mythology, but also the Arthurian legend myth cycle, and how magic and the realms within the story are built, and the general relationship that folks had with the systems within those stories. Centuries later, after this poem was written about the magical cauldron, we get the insurgence of Arthurian romance, right? And this time period where Arthur's tales take a more romantic turn gives us the quest for the Holy Grail. You might have heard of that before. Pretty famous. If you haven't, the Holy Grail is a sacred vessel that heals, restores, and tests the worthiness of people and their hearts. So, long before the Holy Grail was imagined, and long before it became a Christian relic, Wales had its magical cauldrons from Annwn. This theme is old. This through line of this story is very strong. It tells us that a true king must seek something beyond the mortal world, something that connects him to the divine, to the other, and that without the other world, the land becomes barren. And without divine sanction, sovereignty will fail. Arthur's journey into Annwn is not something you want to just brush aside when understanding Arthur's influence and his influence on magical practice and religious and folkloric beliefs. Because while Arthur started as a war leader and hero, he became a king that traversed the thresholds between realms and who held the key to understanding the fabric of the realities that held the rules of those realms together. Arthur's stories helped shape what is a living tradition and the understanding of the relationship humanity has with the other realms, with the land of the Fae, some might call it, with magic itself, with sentient magic. That is really the key when talking about Annwn. It's that Annwn is both a place and it is also a sentient type of magic that can inhabit the things, places, and creatures of Annwn. And Arthur, as this legendary king, goes and shows us how we can interact with that. And we see over and over and over again, it's that he's willing to sacrifice. It's that he looks for the signs, he accepts help, he breaks the rules when he needs to break the rules, but not really. He often doesn't really have to, because the integrity or assumed integrity of his mission really leads the way towards whatever it is he's seeking. Which is pretty unique even in the Celtic realm of myths. Arthurian legend and, all of the things that we think of when we think of knights. Integrity, valor, honor, bravery, strength, all these things that Arthur really brought to the forefront seem to be integral to wielding magic in a way that doesn't completely blow up in your face in the Arthurian myth cycle. But that's a little soapbox that I could go on forever. Let's move on to Gwyn. This is a really interesting part of this part of Arthur's story as well. And Gwyn has a full title that is Welsh. I can't even begin to try and pronounce all of these consonants together, so we're just going to call him Gwyn for now. Okay? Cool. Don't hold it against me, please. In later Welsh traditions that come after when the story of Pwyll and Annwn was written, Annwn sometimes has another ruler, and this ruler is Gwyn, and his full Welsh title is often interpreted as White Son of Mist. And he leads something called the Wild Hunt, which is a ghostly host of riders and hounds that race across the night sky. His white hounds with red ears echo those that Pwyll originally met with in the forest that would prove to be his most fated moment. Gwyn is a little bit darker of a figure than that original king of the Otherworld, Annwn. He's a little bit more frightening, a little bit more looming. He is a little closer to the souls of the dead and those parts of the underworld that host the souls of the dead. With his wild hunt, Gwyn gathers the souls of the dead, which at the time I'm sure was viewed as quite spooky. And at one point I do want to eventually talk about the wild hunt, not just this one, but the various wild hunts in mythology. But to me, it's not spooky, it's really badass. But for now, I want you to know that it's not just me that thinks it's badass. Even medieval Christian writers thought that it was badass to have wild ghost hounds and creatures that you would ride across the night sky to collect souls of the dead, or those you otherwise deemed as needing reaping. Right? These early medieval Christian writers would admit that Gwyn had a certain kind of authority over the spirits of Annwn, so that they wouldn't overwhelm the world. Let's talk about how cool that is, that early Christian writers were acknowledging a force outside of capital G God that was integral and essential to the fabric of reality, yet again, maintaining this balance, right? However, we see yet again the through line of integrity being what keeps that balance going. What that relationship to magic looks like when you view it through the wide-angle lens of ancient Welsh folkloric belief. And then eventually, I guess it would also be mythological, because it was part of their religious worldview pre-Christianity, right? And I'm sure it varied in different places, but there was that through line of the different pillars of what held reality together and the way that they believed it did, what the levels of the different worlds look like, and how magic and spirits and humans needed to do, and how we moved between them. I'm rambling now. To bring it back to Arthur, he does meet Gwyn, and he negotiates with Gwyn. The stories of Arthur and Gwyn are not something we're going to dive into right now. I just wanted to bring it back around to Arthur's legends never really being about him conquering the Otherworld, conquering what some consider the land of the Fae, or even conquering magic. Rather, he maintains a balance with it. He goes and does heroic stuff, but he's always maintaining that balance. And that's why he is considered by some to be the heroic king of kings, the legend of all legends. And this masculine approach to being in harmony and balance with magic that Arthur's tales can show us sometimes fascinates and intrigues me, which is why this is episode 2, because I wanted you to know where Arthur is coming from when he goes and engages with the world, whether it's our world or the other world. Now, at the end of Arthur's life, at a battle called the Battle of Camlan, he is mortally wounded. And he's not dead when the story ends, so he doesn't have a burial or a funeral or anything like that. He is wounded and dying, but not dead in his last story. And in that story, he is taken across the water to Avalon. Avalon is the Isle of Apples. That's what Avalon means, the Isle of Apples. And it is an island where no one ages and no one ever dies, and it is full of endless orchards upon orchards upon orchards of these magical apples. You can imagine Avalon as a region of Annwn. Just like in Greek mythology, how Hades has Tartarus and the Elysian Fields and all of the other places that it has, Annwn also has different regions in it, and Avalon is one of those regions. And because Arthur was taken to Avalon, this is partly why he is still a living legend in Wales, because his story ends by saying that his legend is not over, because he is prophesied to return again when the world needs him most. Not gone, per se, just elsewhere, waiting and biding his time until he is called once more to greatness. Annwn is the submerged half, the undercurrent, per se, of Arthur's story. It's the source of his sword, it's the source of his trials, it's the source of his legitimacy, and it's the place he returns to in the end. Without Annwn, Arthur is just a historical war hero. And with Annwn, he becomes myth. He rises from the ranks of legend into the realm of myth. And in Wales, their myths were never separate from their landscape. All across Wales, and honestly into Britain and other Celtic regions, you will find places that claim to be Avalon, that claim to be Arthur's final resting place when he returned to the Otherworld like all souls do to Annwn. That is how Annwn is still a living part of Arthur as living legend. So now, if you are ever in Wales or simply walking around wherever it is you find yourself, I want you to consider the fact that myths and legends can live within the land. If you walk hills at dusk, or you see mist gathering in the hollow and low places, or on top of lakes, ponds, or rivers, If you ever look into a body of water and see the sky perfectly reflecting, you may experience and feel, too, the nearness and the majesty of Annwn. And perhaps you can consider that somewhere beneath a hill, beneath a mountain, beneath the surface of time, a king still waits for that moment when greatness calls and he must answer. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Wishcrafting. I hope you enjoyed it. Short and sweet, but an essential part of setting up the understanding of King Arthur and his myth cycle and him as a figure, period. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to find more of my work, check out the show notes. There will be all of the info you need there, as well as information and links on how to get in contact with me if you want to talk to me. I always love hearing from you. That's all I have for now. So until next time, my name is Wishamaya. Don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.